New outlooks came out this morning, and there are a number of things interest to talk about that could be impacting the rest of our summer, as well as some current impacts to talk about. So I will now hand it over to Martha Shulsky, who has recently taken over the position as the state climatologist and director of the Nebraska State Climate Office at the University of Nebraska. Take it away, Martha.
Great. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for attending. So on the first slide here, we have some images of storms that rolled through Lincoln last Monday, in fact. So the image on the lower left was taken by my colleague Bill Sorensen. That's an EF1 tornado as seen from his house. He got to safety, so that's good. He's fine. So we had a couple of tornadoes come through Lincoln. There wasn't a lot of damage from the tornadoes per se, but there was from flash flooding and very large hailstones. And so you can see image from one of the golf courses in Lincoln and lots of pretty decent-sized divots there. And there on the right, upper right, somebody holding a picture of what looks like a softball, but it's actually quite a big hailstone. So that was an interesting thing that we had come through Lincoln here last week. So just a bit of general information to get us started here. So, so in providing this webinar to you today and for every month, this is a collaborative activity between NOAA and NCEI and Doug Cluck in particular, American Association of State Climatologists. We have quite a few state climatologists present these, like myself. A lot of the information that we are going to show you comes from the Midwest and the High Plains Regional Climate Centers, as well as the NOAA Climate Prediction Center and the National Drought Mitigation Center, which is also located here at the University of Nebraska campus. The next Climate and Drought Outlook webinar will be June 16th of this year, and Brian Fuchs from the National Drought Mitigation Center will be giving that webinar. You can get to future webinars and information in the URL listed below, the drought.gov URL, and you can also listen to recorded presentations and view the slides from past webinars at both the High Plains and the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. So I'll go through the presentation and then we will open it up and have time for questions at the end. So the agenda for today, I wanted to talk about cover a few slides that talk about conditions since the first of the year. Been pretty warm, so I just have a few slides to cover that. We'll do an April recap of conditions for the month of April. Then we'll look at conditions for the first few weeks of May and some current conditions. We'll go into a bit about impacts. It's not been too active in terms of serious impacts, so that's certainly a good thing, but I do have a few impacts to talk about. And then we'll discuss the latest climate outlooks and a bit on La Nina. That's probably what's on most people's minds. So we'll talk about that a bit and then have time again for questions and comments at the end. So the map you're looking at here is statewide average temperature rankings for the period January through April of 2016. The contiguous U.S. average temperature since January 1 was actually the warmest on record. It surpassed 2015. So this is the rankings going back to 1895. So as you can see, the contiguous U.S. was either in the above average or a lot of the U.S. was in the much above average category since the beginning of the year and through the month of April. In terms of precipitation, it was in the above average category for the contiguous U.S. as a whole and running about average for Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Colorado, Montana, and below average for Illinois, Missouri, above for Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Wyoming, and then much above average for Nebraska. That was in the top 10 for the period January through April 2016. So that was since the beginning of the year. So let's go back to April in particular, where we had near average temperatures for the northern and eastern states within the north central region, and then above average temperatures for the central and southern portion. So again, this is for the month of April in particular. And you can find the URL, the web link to where I've obtained these images at the bottom of, I think all of these slides should have a URL at the bottom in case you'd like to visit that further. So if we look at terms of departure from normal for the region, you can see where the warm and the cool spots were. So the strongest departures were in the south central part of the region, with temperatures running in the 2 to 4 degrees above normal range. The definite cool spots were in the northern fringes, with some locations, for example, the Arrowhead of Minnesota and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and northern Michigan, were up to 5 degrees below normal for the month of April. For April precipitation conditions, if we look at the contiguous U.S. as a whole, the precipitation was, it averaged about 2.95 inches, which is about ½ inch above the 20th century average. The conditions obviously had a definite east to west split, with above or much above precipitation totals for the west, with Kansas and Nebraska having precipitation totals in the top 5 wettest for April, and then near normal conditions for the eastern half. So here we're looking at precipitation for April on a percent of normal basis. So you can see just how far departure from normal some of these areas were. So the wet areas were actually more than twice the normal amount. You can see Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and portions of Wyoming and Montana, where we had about 200% of normal in those wet areas. And then we had a dry pocket in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, where those few states come together, where that section had actually about less than half the normal amount of precip for April. If we look at temperatures in particular, here we're looking for the first few weeks of May, and so on the left we've got just the average observed temperatures for that period from May 1st to May 18th, and then on the right we have a departure from normal temperature for that 18-day time period. So we see average temperatures running in the low 60s in the southern part of the region to the upper 40s in the north. In terms of a departure from normal, we're looking mostly at cooler conditions by about a few degrees. The warmer than normal conditions has been sort of in this pocket of Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota in the upper portion of the region, whereas everything else has been below normal so far for the month of May. If we do the same thing for precipitation, so here on the left we have a precipitation total for May 1st to May 18th, and then on the right we have, here we're looking at a departure from normal precipitation in inches as opposed to a percent of normal precipitation. So if we look on the left here, you can see the totals. You can see the heaviest amounts occurring in the southeast part of the region, along the southern portion of Missouri and Illinois, Indiana, and into Kentucky. You can also see some isolated areas of heavier precipitation in Wyoming. And Fremont County had some very heavy rainfalls that were causing some impacts, and I'll discuss that a little bit more later in the webinar. So on the right, you'll see a departure from normal view. So anything in green has received above normal precipitation since the 1st of May. So they're kind of interspersed pockets of wetter than normal and drier than normal so far this May. So as of this morning, here's the latest USGS stream flow map. So the stream flow conditions are running normal to much above normal for areas of southeast Wyoming, northern Colorado, much of Nebraska, western portions of Iowa, and portions of western Kansas, as well as southern Missouri. Areas where we're seeing below to much below normal is primarily in northern Wisconsin, Minnesota, and western portions of North Dakota. So again, that's a look at current stream flow conditions. You do see a few of the black dots here, and that's a high value, so the estimated stream flow is the highest value that's ever measured for this particular day of year, so May 19th. So we do see some black dots scattered about in the regions and portions of Nebraska and southeast Wyoming, and a little bit in South Dakota as well. So here we have a look at mountain snow water content at 2 points along the Missouri River Basin. So this graph is showing the current season in the blue shading, the 30-year average in the thicker red line, and then 3 comparison years with 1997 and 2011 with high water content, and then 2001 with low water content there in green. So right now, or as of this morning, the total mountain snowpack water content in the basin above Fort Peck is running a little bit below average at 64% of average. So you can kind of compare the blue areas with that red area. And if we look there on the right, the total Fort Peck to Garrison is running a bit higher than further up, but it's still below average at about 81%. So if we shift our focus to a bit further south here, so this is an issue that we're watching closely, especially here in Nebraska. If we're looking at the mountain snowpack water content in the Platte River Basin. So we've got the total for the North Platte on the left and then the South Platte on the right. So for the North Platte, currently, again, the current conditions are in blue, and then the red is the most recent 30-year average. So we're running about 140% of average in the North Platte and 128% of average in the South Platte. So again, in both these areas, we're running above average in terms of snowpack water content. So this slide here, so from the USDA NRCS, it gives you kind of a basin-wide perspective of mountain snowpack. This is as of May 18th. So I've outlined the area in blue where we're seeing the snow water equivalent that is above average. So all the basins in Colorado, in fact, and much of the basins in the southern part of Wyoming are running in a 120 to 150% of normal, with one basin in particular above 200% in Wyoming. So obviously we're going to see more impact to these, to the Platte River flows as the snowmelt begins in earnest. So if we look at river conditions, this is for the Missouri Basin as a whole. So the greatest area of concern right now is again for the Platte. There you can see the North Platte here. I can use my mouse cursor here. So primarily in the North Platte, we're seeing minor to moderate flooding occurring at the moment. And again, so this is certainly areas that we're going to continue to watch here in the future as the snowmelt continues. We shift our focus a bit eastward. So here we're in the Mississippi River Basin. So the primary area of concern here would be portions of central and southern Illinois with some pockets of minor flooding. There are a few areas in central Iowa, northern Indiana, and central Michigan are approaching flood stage. So a few minor areas here to be concerned with. So now if we shift eastward in the Ohio River Basin, we see near flood stage conditions at a few locations that are isolated along the Illinois-Indiana border. The rest of the area is in the green with no flooding that's been reported. So let's move on here and take a look at the U.S. Drought Monitor. And here we're comparing May 10th on the left with May 17th on the right. So the one on the right is the most recent Drought Monitor that came out this morning and valid for conditions on this past Tuesday, May 17th. So as you can see, not a lot of areas in the region are currently in drought conditions, so that's a good thing. There was an area of improvement with D1 erased and a shrinking of D0 in the southern part of Missouri, so we've seen some improvement there. Kentucky also saw some removal of D0 over the course of the last week, so we've had some beneficial rains occur in the southern portion of the region over the last week to help improve those drought conditions. We did have a pocket that saw some degradation that was near the Black Hills with a 1 category degradation in conditions, and we also saw the introduction of D1 or moderate drought in that area, a small pocket in that area. So if we look at and kind of compare conditions over the course of the last month, and so since the last webinar was given a month ago, that's what you're seeing, a comparison of this week with 1 month ago. So we're comparing April 19th to May 17th conditions. And in a lot of the country, actually, you see quite a bit of green represented here, which represents an improvement in dryness or drought conditions. So we've seen, particularly in southern areas and in Wyoming and North Dakota as well, again, an improvement in drought conditions over that 1 month time period. So here, if we look at moisture conditions, we'll look both at topsoil and subsoil moisture conditions. So here we're showing topsoil moisture in the short or very short category. So this is for the week ending in Sunday, May 15th. The top number is the percentage of short to very, very short within a given state. And then the bottom number in parentheses is the change from last week. So for the north central region as a whole, the area of most concern here, and one that we'll continue to watch certainly as the summer progresses, is North Dakota and Minnesota here, with 24 and 13% of that state in the topsoil moisture in the short to very short category. We did see an improvement in North Dakota, and then a change in Minnesota as well from the previous week. So that's looking at topsoil moisture. The next slide here is looking at subsoil moisture. So here again showing conditions in the short to very short category. So we see the same areas showing up with what to watch here going into the growing season. So North Dakota at 20% of subsoil moisture in the short to very short category, Minnesota at 11%, Missouri also at 11%, Kansas 15%, Colorado 17%. So there's some areas that we'll certainly be watching as we progress into the growing season. So I'll talk about some impacts here, and let's see, I'll just kind of move across the map here. There was a frost and freeze event that occurred for much of the region. The damage in some areas is still being assessed. It doesn't seem like at this point that it's been very extensive, and it's early enough in the planting season that things are able to recover is what it's looking like. Crop progress, crop progress is good here in North Dakota. Again, still looking at freeze damage being assessed in South Dakota. We're getting reports out of Minnesota that the freeze damage to corn is not expected. That's something that we're watching here in Nebraska. And in Kansas as well, they're looking at a possibility of frost damage to wheat in the western part of the state. So that's something we don't have a good handle on this point, but we're waiting for reports to come in. Something, again, that we're watching in Nebraska is concerns of high flow coming into the Platte as the snow melt progresses. We did, and I alluded to this earlier, we did have some flooding impacts in Fremont County, and in particular at the Wind River Indian Reservation with significant and very heavy rainfall. So we did see some impacts with that. Getting some crop reports out of Wyoming where the winter wheat and the rangeland are in good condition, so that is good. No significant impacts to report in Colorado. The water supplies are looking quite good this year in terms of mountain and snow water equivalent. Not a whole lot else to report in other portions of the region. No major concerns are showing up. In Missouri, as I mentioned earlier, they've received some moisture when that's been needed. A few reports coming out of Illinois with stripe rust possibility in wheat, so that's something that we'll be watching. No major concerns as of yet in Indiana. We saw some alleviation of the dryness with some rains that were received in Kentucky, and that alleviation of dryness in southeastern part of the state. Probably the most impact to crop progress has been delayed planting in Michigan. So we've seen some wetness issues there and difficulty getting into the field with wet conditions. And one thing that I did want to point out is Lake Michigan, where we have a very impressive rebound with a rise of 4 feet in the elevation of the lake since January of 2013. And as I understand it and reading reports, the main factors there in causing that rise would be precipitation that they've received, ice cover, and less evaporation. Those are cited as some of the causes of that pretty significant change in lake levels on Lake Michigan. So we'll take a look at some crop progress reports. This is from the National Agricultural Statistics Service, and these reports can be found in the weekly weather and crop bulletin. So these reports are from the issue that came out on May 17th. So on the left here we have the corn percent planted as well as percent emerged right next to it. And so I've outlined the states and the conditions in green if it's more than 10 percentage points difference from the 5-year average. So we have Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Minnesota, Missouri. You can see those are kind of ahead of schedule. North Dakota as well as Wisconsin, and seeing some delays and issues there for Michigan and Ohio. And if we look at the middle table there in terms of corn percent emerged, you can see for Iowa, Kentucky, Minnesota, Missouri, and North Dakota, those are all in very good shape in terms of corn emergence when compared to the 5-year average, where we're seeing half the state roughly or more that has been emerged, and North Dakota at 22% of corn planted that has emerged so far. So on the right we have the winter wheat condition. So this is how it's rated in terms of percentage. So we have, starting from the far left, we have very poor, then poor, fair, good, and excellent. And in most cases we're sitting in a pretty decent spot here with a significant percent that's in the good to excellent category. So we're in pretty decent shape here with the winter wheat condition. So looking at a few more crops here, so soybeans planted. On the left-hand side, we've got having some issues in terms of planting when compared to the 5-year average. So for Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Nebraska, and Ohio, anything in the red box there, So they're running about 10 to 30% planted, which is running a bit behind the most recent 5-year average. Whereas in Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin, they're running ahead of schedule, running ahead of their 5-year average. I didn't include emergence here. There's been, on average, less than 10% of soybean plants that have actually emerged, so I did not include that table here. So on the in the middle and right, we have oats, percent planted and percent emerged. So you can see a majority of it has been planted there for Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. That's running well above average. That's why I've got the green bar around it. In Nebraska, we're in good shape, running about where the 5-year average is, as well as Iowa. And then oats emerged. A lot of emergence here, and the areas again in green are where I'm showing more than 10 percentage points over the 5-year average. So Minnesota, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, Wisconsin, we're seeing an uptick in oats emergence when compared to the 5-year average. I've also got barley emergence there, and kind of in the middle, the bottom table here, we're showing Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, barley emergence statistics. And then finally on the lower right, we've got sugar beets. That's a percent planted, where we're in good shape there for Michigan, Minnesota, and North Dakota, where most, if not all, sugar beets have been planted. So now we'll kind of transition to the climate outlooks. So we'll look at the 7-day QPF, the precipitation forecast, go over the 8 to 14-day outlook, look at some river flood outlooks, talk a bit about La Nina and drought outlooks, and then summer and fall conditions. So this is the 7-day QPF total, so the quantitative precipitation forecast available from NOAA. So you can see the areas of the region that will be projected to receive some precipitation in the coming week. It's mostly confined, the appreciable amounts are mostly confined to the southern portion of the north central region here. If we look at the 8 to 14-day forecast, so this is valid May 26th to June 1st. So we have temperature on the left and precipitation on the right. So in terms of temperatures, so the orange and red colors there, we're seeing an increased probability, an increased chance of above normal temperatures for much of the north central region, with the exception of portions of southwest Wyoming and much of Colorado. Where those areas are seeing an increased chance for below normal temperatures, again for the 8 to 14-day forecast. Then on the right we have precipitation, where we have a pocket where we have an increased chance of below normal precipitation, therefore eastern Montana, the northwestern tip of South Dakota, and pretty much all of North Dakota. And then for the equal chances for areas further south, southern portion of the region, so the southern third of Nebraska, eastern and southern Colorado, all of Kansas, and much of Missouri, we're in a pocket of increased chance for above normal precipitation conditions for the next 8 to 14 days. If we look at significant river flood outlook, so potential for flooding conditions, this is valid, issued yesterday and then valid through Monday, May 23rd, and we're seeing a few pockets of red here where it's occurring or imminent. Again, that's the areas that I talked about along the North Platte River in particular, where we are already seeing moderate flooding in those areas. All right, so let's talk a little bit about El Nino. And so this headline I actually took the ENSO blog that's available on the climate.gov website. I thought it was good and probably appropriate for now. So the El Nino to La Nina update and switcheroo. So in the upper left, I have the historical, it's the Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies, is what we're looking at. So the variations from El Nino to La Nina. This time period goes back to 1982 and then ends at the present time. So you can see the transition from El Ninos to La Ninas over time and what those have looked like. Since we've obviously been in a very strong El Nino that appears to have peaked and appears to rapidly be declining. We're in this time frame obviously right now. And if we zoom in, this particular graphic is from the ENSO blog. And so it's looking just at the time period from January of 2015, January of last year, through the present time period, almost to May. And kind of the ramp up of the warming in the equatorial Pacific and then how the temperatures have trended over the past few months. So it gives you kind of a perspective of this current sea surface temperature conditions and in this graphic, and then kind of a longer term perspective of that variation from El Nino to La Nina. So here again I've borrowed some graphics from the ENSO blog. So as you're well aware and are following, I'm sure, most models are predicting the El Nino conditions will come to an end in early summer, and the reason being are two of the graphics that I'm showing here. So we're looking at the here in the upper left. So we're looking at the equatorial Pacific and sea surface temperature anomalies. This one happens to be for the week of May 4th. So some areas of near or below average sea surface temperatures are already starting to appear here in the eastern equatorial Pacific. And then if we look at, talk about this image in the lower right-hand corner of cool water under the surface, and that's really helping the confidence of these forecasts. So here we're looking at ocean temperatures starting at the surface and going to 300 meters below the surface, again in the equatorial Pacific. So these are subsurface temperature anomalies, and there's this big blue blob, so to speak, that is there and starting to appear. And so we've seen some cooling at the surface start, and this cool pool of water that's below the surface that's helping these forecasts of La Nina conditions starting to appear. Okay, and this graphic I thought was interesting. It's looking at when you're in an El Nino pattern, what has occurred after the year following an El Nino. So, so in this pink color here, 4 times has an El Nino year followed a current El Nino year. If the year following an El Nino was neutral, then it's in this white portion of the graphic here. So there's been about 7 or so that have turned out neutral after an El Nino year. And if the year following an El Nino was La Nina, then that's what is seen in this blue section of the graphic there at the bottom. So historically, it's been more likely that a La Nina would follow these El Nino year conditions. Okay, so we are in a La Nina watch now, so that's issued when conditions are favorable for the development of La Nina within the next 6 months. That's according to the Climate Prediction Center. So here's the official probabilistic ENSO forecast. Excuse me, sorry about that. This was issued early May, so we're looking through time starting April, May, June, and going 3-month periods out until December, January, February 2017. And so by season, so here El Nino is in red, neutral in green, and La Nina in blue. So here over the next several months, you can see this this ramp up or this increased chance for La Nina conditions to occur as opposed to neutral or El Nino. And here on the left-hand side, we have the probability in terms of percentage. And so by the July, August, September timeframe, we're at a 65% probability of La Nina occurring. So we'll look at some monthly and seasonal outlooks here. So the June temperature and precipitation. And these are a bit different than what they were last month. So here they've introduced, here on the left, we're looking at temperature outlooks for the month of June. So equal chances for certain portions of the region here, increased chance for warmer than normal conditions for the eastern and northern section of the region. And then they've introduced a pocket of an increased chance for below normal temperatures for portions of South Dakota, much of Nebraska, western Kansas, and eastern Colorado, and a little bit of Wyoming. So along with this, if we transition over here on the right-hand side to precipitation conditions, for a lot of the region, they're showing increased chance for wetter than normal conditions, equal chances here in between, and then on the northern, a bit of a northern section, increased chance for below normal precipitation conditions there for northeast North Dakota, the northern half of Minnesota, and northern tier of Wisconsin. So that's for June. If we look at June, July, August, summer conditions here, so temperature being on the left here, we see for much of the U.S. increased chance for above normal temperatures, except for this portion here in the middle where there's not skill at this time, equal chances of above or below normal conditions here. So kind of this donut hole in the midsection here of this region. So to go along with that, so coinciding with that would be the precipitation projections. This is for the summertime, July-August time period. We're calling for an increased chance for some wetness occurring here for Kansas, portions of Missouri, western Iowa, much of South Dakota, all of Nebraska, Wyoming, and much of Colorado as well. So those are the summer conditions and outlooks. If we look for the drought outlook, this is again just released this morning, so valid for May 19th through the end of August. So an area of concern, an area that we'll be watching is the development of drought here in North Dakota and the upper half of Minnesota, portions of Wisconsin, and a bit of South Dakota. So the seasonal drought outlook is indicating a possibility for drought development in those areas. So that's certainly an area that we'll be watching as the growing season progresses. And then a few areas scattered about here where they've got drought removal likely to occur. Okay, if we go a bit further in the growing season, and fall time, looking at end of growing season and harvest time, so August, September, October outlook. For temperatures, it's pretty much across the board for the U.S., an increased chance for above normal temperatures. And if we look at precipitation conditions, we see for a big section here of kind of the central and southern portion of the north central region, calling for an increased chance for below normal precipitation, again for the August, September, October time frame. Okay, if we go out a bit further, October, November, December time frame, Again, so this is when there's a decent chance for La Nina setting up and coming into play here. So for much of the contiguous U.S., from North Dakota and the upper portion of Minnesota, the Climate Prediction Center is calling for an increased chance of above normal temperatures, again continuing through fall and early winter. And in terms of precipitation projections, for the north central region, we're in equal chances of above or below normal, with the exception of Colorado. So here we're starting to see this big swath here with a larger increased chance for below normal precipitation for the fall months. Okay. So to summarize here, so in terms of recent conditions that I just talked about, so we've received some needed precipitation across the southern tier of the north central region, and we've alleviated some abnormal dryness conditions that were in place in Missouri as well as Kentucky. In looking at the corn acres planted, we're in pretty good shape actually for most of the region. Michigan, though, is the exception. They're running about 20% points or so behind the most recent 5-year average with the recent wetness that they've received. But overall, the corn acres plant is in pretty good shape for where we are in the season. There's been a delay for soybean planting for the southern portion of the states. Not the case for the northern tier. Those are pretty good in terms of acreage of soybeans planted. There are some flood concerns that we're watching for the Platte River, North Platte in particular. The main reservoir is getting close to capacity. So Lake McConaughey is a large reservoir in Nebraska. That's at 90.9% capacity right now, and they are doing releases of water for that. So we're seeing some downstream effects from that as well. And finally, so the outlooks. So the highest in the short term, so 7-day time periods are expected for the southern part of the region over the next week. And then thinking about the summer outlook, so for the 3-month summer period, an enhanced likelihood of above normal temperatures for portions of the north central region. For the summer, enhanced likelihood for above normal rainfall for Wyoming, Colorado, southern Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, western Iowa, and Missouri, and equal chances elsewhere. There's an area to watch for increased dryness in eastern North Dakota and northern Minnesota, so that's an area we'll be keeping an eye on. And then finally, we're in a La Nina watch, so around a 70% likelihood that La Nina will emerge by the August, September, October timeframe. So just some web links here. So today's and past presentations are archived at both the High Plains Regional Climate Center and the Midwestern Regional Climate Center website. And there's several web links here to get more information, get Climate Prediction Center or drought information or information about the state climatologists. So just some reference links for you there. And so thank you all for attending and listening. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Dennis Toddy, state climatologist for South Dakota, he's also on the line in addition to myself. So there's our contact information along with others that are involved in the production of this webinar. We've got, there's our email and phone number indicated there. So I'd be happy to stop and take questions.
Thanks, Martha and Dennis. Go ahead, Dennis, if you're ready. I have a few questions here, and I can unmute a few lines.
Okay. Yes, thanks, Brian. We will now open it up for questions where Martha will deal with them, or I'll chime in as we need to. I think there were some along the way that came up in the chat room, too. So, Brian, if you can open it up, let's go ahead and open up for questions.
Benjamin Diamond, I'm going to unmute your line. Benjamin, you have the first question.
Okay, so if we could go back to the slides where we discussed the percent of normal precipitation and temperature anomalies, I just wanted to know what the normal period was.
Sure. Which would those be seasonal outlooks or?
Towards the beginning, where
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
with precipitation anomaly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah. Okay, I was wondering what the normal period was.
Yeah, so I believe for this it's the most recent climate normal, so it'd be 1981 to 2010. For
Okay, and that's for precipitation.
Yes.
Is it the same for temperature?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, thanks. And then I also had another question where you were talking, you had a map of the USDA short or very short topsoil moisture and subsoil moisture. And then if we could go to that slide.
Yes.
Okay. And so I think you were saying a positive number on the bottom, the change from last week would be a good change. It would be an improvement versus last week. But then I'm just trying to understand the percent short to very short is, for example, North Dakota up by 5% from last week. Would that be a degradation?
Yes, good question. If I understand it correctly, yes. So that was an increase. So from 19 to 24% in short to very short.
Okay,
so actually it would end up being a degradation, not an improvement. That the area of topsoil moisture that is in the short to very short category went from 19 to 24, so there was a worsening of conditions in North Dakota.
Okay. Okay, and then for the planting delays, if we could go to that slide with corn and soybean planting delays. I think one was corn, the other was a soybean.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So, what is the reason for Michigan and Ohio having planting delays?
I believe the wetness, the recent wetness, that's input I've received from the state climatologist in Michigan, where he said it's just been very wet and just not able to get equipment into the field.
I think Jeff also mentioned that they had been, if you remember some of the temperature maps, they had been running colder too. So conditions were probably not warm enough from a soil perspective to be planting appropriately either.
Okay. And then for soybean, if we can go to that slide. Yeah. What is the reason for all those states in red for having planting delays?
Yeah, good question. You know, I know for Nebraska we're sitting in good shape for corn, but not as good for soybean. To be honest, I haven't heard of reasoning as to why there's been a delay. I don't know if that's something that you have heard, Dennis.
My only guess is that we had that week that was fairly cool, that people may have delayed planting with the cool conditions. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't know if any of our SCs from that area are here, that they could chime in or not. But I'm not sure for the delay in the soybean planting over there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question.
Yeah, because we have temperatures this far for May have been, this is right, they've been running cooler, so that could be something. But yeah, I haven't heard any justification as to why soybean is running behind. So unfortunately I don't have a really good answer for you.
Okay. And where it says less than 10% emergence, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, so I think I didn't show the table, didn't pull it over from the weekly weather and crop bulletin. So for pretty much all states in the region, there was 10% or less of the soybeans planted have emerged. So so I chose not to show that soybean emergence, but so if you pick any one of these states that they've been planted, it's either 10% or less has actually emerged, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. And then a final question for the drought development map. Why would North Dakota and Minnesota drought development be likely?
Yeah, I think given where they are in terms of precipitation over the last few months, kind of looking at short and long-term precipitation amount, they haven't been getting the wetness that other areas of the region have. They're also running, if you remember back to the topsoil and subsoil moisture in the short to very short, that area is also running a little bit higher in terms of percentage. So I think it's a function of rains that they've missed out on recently. So they haven't gotten rain like the other areas have. So just an area of concern, an area to watch out for.
The other part about that is that they are not in one of the areas that is considered to be wetter. Part of the early summer, I think the June outlook mentions or shows that area as a bit more likely to be drier. Plus, if you factor in the temperature outlooks for the summer, they are consistently warmer than average throughout the summer. They don't catch that donut hole. So if you couple warmer than average temperatures with some somewhat dry conditions going in, I was betting that there will be some areas of D1 that will pop up there somewhere along the summer, and that's all you need to have for verification, is that it reaches D1 condition at some point.
Okay, and those outlooks take into account the La Nina outlook?
The outlook for the drought outlook incorporates the CPC outlooks. They don't. The La Nina is incorporated into the CPC temperature and precipitation outlooks, and those are what are used to push into the drought outlook.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Please raise your hand if anyone else has any questions or comments.
Philip Marty, are you available? Your phone is unmuted.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering about maybe the level of drought we should be expecting on these seasonal outlooks, particularly in the West and Washington. If it's going to be as extreme as last year, if we're thinking the D1, similar to what you're talking in Minnesota.
Well, one, just from a Washington standpoint, this is a central region one, so we don't deal with the western one too much. All that has to verify is that these yellow areas, they have to go one tick into a drought category. That's all they have to do to verify. They're not trying to make an estimation as to how far into drought they're going to go. So they're not trying to make an estimation on that. And that north central area, I would not expect it to go any further than maybe D1. We don't see anything specifically right now that would indicate that would go beyond a D1.
Great, thanks.
Dennis, that is the final of our questions. If you want to, if anyone is interested, please raise your hand. Otherwise, Dennis, do you have some concluding remarks?
Thank you all for attending today. Thank you very much, Martha. Excellent job, excellent summary. If there are any other questions you have at any point, we're certainly happy to answer them, and if we can't get you an answer, we'll get you in contact with someone who can. We will invite you back next month on the third Thursday for when Brian Fuchs from the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska will be presenting. Have a great week.